The drone's arm came down before anyone could shout a warning. Steel met bone, and the training yard went quiet the wrong way, not silence, but the kind of quiet that comes right before screaming starts. A cadet named Unitash stared down at an arm dislocated at the elbow, bent backward in a way elbows don't bend, and the drone's threat display still red-green. 6. That was the number stuck behind Connor Ray's teeth as he watched it happen. 5 other cadets had already underestimated him this cycle and ended up on a gurney. This would make a 6th name nobody had asked him to keep count of, except the list wasn't about cadets who challenged him anymore. It was about anyone careless enough to be standing near broken machinery when it stopped following its own rules. His ribs hadn't finished healing. He didn't check them. He just moved. 3 strides. That was all the distance the drone left him, and he covered it before his own squad finished turning their heads. He didn't yell for backup. He didn't look for an exit. He went straight at a wall of malfunctioning ally with nothing but taped ribs and a foot that still ached on cold mornings, because the only other option was watching Una lose the second arm too. No warning chime, no safety lock, no reason a maintenance drone should move that fast. The drone's optic housing swung toward him next, the same limb that had broken Una's arm, recalibrating with a whir that didn't match any pattern in its training log. Connor planted his back foot, a half-step short of where that swing would land. The same half-step a coach back in the flood gyms of New Manila Undercity had drilled into him 1,000 times before either of them had ever heard the word Concord. He raised his forearm to take the hit meant for the back of Una's skull. Whether he reached her first, or the drone did, is where the worst minute of the whole cycle hung in the air, frozen between one heartbeat and the next. He would close that gap, ribs and all. Whether he reached her in time is the only question worth staying for. 3 weeks earlier, the only thing broken on Halcyon Concord Academy was a vending unit that ate credits and gave nothing back. It sat outside the gate, blinking an error code instead of stealing in silence, which was the closest thing to honesty the machine had ever managed. Cadets filed past it in clusters, fresh uniforms still creased from shipping crates, voices loud with the kind of confidence that hadn't been tested by anything yet. Connor Ray's was not loud. He came up the last stretch of the boarding ramp alone, weight rolling off his right side, jaw tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold fog rolling off Vera Station's towers. He stopped at the base of the gate scanner and rewrapped his own knuckles, pulled the tape off, smoothed it flat, wound it back on tighter, the way he always did, the way nobody had ever once had to remind him to do. Nobody asked if he needed help. He never gave them the chance. The laughter started before he reached the scanner line. A pack of cadets near the rail clocked the limp first, then the lack of any visible hardware on his arms, his spine, his skull, no plating, no ports, no augment housing at all, and decided that was funnier than anything else they'd seen that morning. One of them said the word Terran like it was a punchline on its own. Cadet Brack Dorhan peeled off from his squad to make sure Connor heard it up close. He stood 7.5 feet of lime bronze plating, knuckle ridges retracted but visible under the skin like a promise, 3 combat medals catching the fog light on his chest. They let the soft one through the gate, Dorhan said, voice warbling slightly through a modulator that hadn't quite settled. Did Earth run out of metal, or did it just run out of trying? Connor didn't stop walking until the distance between them had closed to exactly the wrong amount for Dorhan's comfort. Another half step, he said, flat, no heat in it at all, and you lose the use of one of those arms today. A ripple of laughter went through the cadets behind Dorhan. Dorhan's mandible line twitched, amusement, not concern, and he leaned in anyway, certain his plating and his dampened reflexes made the warning decorative. Pain doesn't get a vote, Connor said. Technique does. Yours hasn't shown up yet. That was when the gate scanner caught up to the conversation. A red glyph bloomed above the entry arch, bright enough to cut through the fog, and a flat mechanical voice read out a line that hadn't existed in any cadet's file before this exact moment. Terran cadet. Physical contact inadvisable. The laughter didn't stop. It just changed shape, sharpened into something closer to disbelief, because the Academy's own threat assessment system had never once recommended caution before a single punch had been thrown. Nobody had touched anyone yet. The scanner didn't care. Dorhan barked something that was meant to be a laugh and stepped back, plating clicking as he reset his stance, deciding the warning was a glitch worth mocking rather than a fact worth respecting. That decision would cost someone else, not him, because a six-limbed Quenny's cadet named Vec Thurin had already broken from the crowd, reflexes faster than anyone's caution, and he wasn't interested in waiting to see if the machine was right. "Hold still," Vec said, which wasn't a request. He came in low and fast on four legs with two arms cocked for a strike, segmented exoskin flexing at a speed no plated species could match. Connor didn't hold still. He stepped inside the reach instead of away from it, which was the part nobody in the crowd expected, and put three strikes into the places Vec's own anatomy had never been trained to protect. The joint behind the second elbow, the hinge above the third leg, the narrow seam where four limbs met the central nerve cluster. Two joints gave at once with a sound like a wet branch snapping. A third locked wrong and stayed that way. Vec Thurin went down in under 4 seconds, six limbs suddenly arranged in angles his own body had never asked for, and didn't get back up. The plaza didn't gasp. It went silent in the specific way a crowd goes silent when it realizes the joke it was laughing at has teeth. Medical drones swept in from the side corridors, strobes cutting red through the fog, and not one cadet near the gate moved to help carry the stretcher. They were too busy staring at the unaugmented human standing exactly where he'd started, breathing slow, hands already lowered like nothing had happened at all. Commander Severin Cal arrived before the drones had finished loading Vec onto the gurney, her boots cracking against the wet plating of the entry deck. She didn't look at Dorhan. She looked at Connor and at the still glowing red glyph above his head, and at the gap between what the scanner had warned and what had actually occurred. "You dropped him in under 4 seconds," she said. "You could have ended that faster, or slower, or not at all. Why did you choose exactly that much?" Connor flexed his taped hand once, the only sign that anything in his body still hurt. "I gave him a warning," he said. "He didn't take it. That's his choice showing up on someone else's medical chart, not mine." The corridor behind them had gone quiet enough to hear the vending unit outside, still blinking its honest little error, over and over, into the fog. Dr. Naomi Asher had a rule about cadets who walked into her medbay standing up straight. She didn't believe a single one of them. She poured a half cup of recovery broth she had no plan to drink, set it on the counter, and turned the scanner toward Connor without asking permission first. "Sit," she said. Not a request either, but a kinder one than Vex had been. The scan ran for 6 seconds and gave her more information than Connor had volunteered out loud all morning. 2 cracked ribs, healing wrong because nobody had reset them properly the first time. A hairline fracture along one foot, old enough that the bone had started knitting itself crooked. None of it new. All of it from before he'd ever set foot on the boarding ramp. "You made intake carrying this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I made intake," Connor said. "That's the part that mattered." Asher didn't soften her face for him, which he appreciated more than sympathy would have landed. She taped the ribs properly this time, wrapped the foot tighter than regulation, and told him flatly that his body was already keeping a ledger whether he checked it or not. He listened the way he listened to most warnings filed, not argued with, and not obeyed either. Word of the gate moved through the academy faster than any official report could. By the next meal cycle, cadets who'd laughed at the boarding ramp were watching recordings of the fight from a careful distance, scrubbing back the same 3 seconds again and again, looking for the trick. There wasn't one. That was the part nobody wanted to believe. A clerk in the records office flagged Connor's intake file for a second look and found something stranger than a fight outcome. 0 augmentations listed anywhere on the page, and underneath it, a note some earlier official had typed without much thought. Verify species classification, possible clerical error. Whoever wrote it had assumed a body with no implants, no plating, no ports, had to be a mistake. Nobody had bothered to correct it since. Commander Cal read that note twice before she closed the file. Then she called Instructor Brack Hennar and told him the Sundome would need to clear its schedule. The mandatory session was framed as routine, a combat analysis review, standard after any incident involving hospitalized cadets. Nobody believed that framing for a second. 6 instructors filled the observation ring above the floor when Connor walked out alone. No escort, no second cadet beside him, just a standard combat drone already powering up across the mat. Hennar didn't waste words. Disable it. Don't kill the unit. We still need the budget line. That got a tired laugh from one of the other instructors, the first sound in the room that wasn't a readout chiming. Connor didn't smile. He waited for the drone to commit to its first swing, stepped past it instead of back from it, and put it down with the same economy he'd used on Vec. No flourish, no wasted motion. The kind of fight that looked almost boring until you noticed nothing had gone wrong in it at all. He didn't flinch. He didn't slow down. He didn't ask for a different drone. Hennar sent in a second one before the first had finished sparking on the mat. Faster, randomized attack patterns, the kind built to punish a cadet who'd grown confident off one win. Connor's foot screamed at him on the first pivot. He didn't favor it. He closed the distance anyway, took a glancing strike along his forearm rather than give ground, and ended the second drone in less time than the first. One of the panel members leaned forward and said, quiet enough that it carried anyway, "He's not fighting the drone's pattern. He's fighting into it." That observation didn't stay locked in the observation ring for long. Within a day, a 4-armed Kethrian cadet named Threll Cade petitioned Hennar directly for a sparring trial, not as a challenge, but as a request, phrased with the kind of formality that told Connor everything about how seriously the Kethrian Honor Code treated a fight before it ever started. "I've watched the footage 11 times, Threll said, when they finally stood across from each other on the mat, his obsidian glass skin catching the overhead light in 4 places where his arms crossed at the wrist. I don't understand how a body with 2 limbs solves problems my 4 were built for. I would like to find out properly, not from a recording." "Copy that," Connor said. "Try not to break anything you'll need later." The Kethrians' rigid dueling forms were beautiful to watch and slow to adjust, built for honor and not for improvisation. And Connor found the gap between those 2 things in under a minute, slipping inside a 4-armed clinch that should have locked him down completely. He didn't finish it. He let it stall there, both of them holding position, neither one scoring the clean win the crowd outside the ring had been waiting for. "You could have ended that," Threll said afterward, breathing hard, plating around his shoulders, dulled with sweat for the first time anyone had seen. "Could have," Connor agreed. "Didn't need to. You already showed me what breaks your form. No reason to break you too." It wasn't friendship yet. It was something closer to the first real respect either of them had been handed all cycle, and it didn't come with applause, just Threll's slow nod, and a question he asked without quite meaning to ask it out loud. "Would you show me where the gap was? Properly, not the fast version." Connor considered it longer than the question deserved. "Yeah," he said finally, "I can do that." That single answer moved faster through the academy than the fight had. By evening, Commander Cal had a name to put against a line item she'd been holding open since the gate incident, a squad assignment, the kind reserved for cadets the instructors wanted under direct observation during something with real stakes attached. "Bravo 9 runs a live hostage rescue simulation in 3 days, she told Connor, not asking if he wanted in. "Real breach protocols, real-time pressure, 6 squadmates who have already heard what you did to Vec Thurin and don't much like that you're about to be standing next to them with a rifle." Connor flexed the hand that had spent all morning getting hit by combat drones. "They'll like it less," he said, "if I'm not." Cal didn't argue that. She just filed the assignment, and somewhere down the corridor, the gate scanner's threat tier line updated itself for the second time that cycle, quietly, with no announcement, the way the Academy's systems had started doing every time Connor Ray's proved a warning wrong by surviving it. The breech door dropped 4 seconds late, and that gap was the only thing standing between Bravo 9 and a failed simulation. Connor went through it anyway, low and fast, boots skidding on a floor rigged to feel like rubble. Behind him, a slender Sevun cadet named Ressa Vol covered the angle he'd left open, her narrow frame coiling low the way her species did before a strike, leg muscles loaded like a spring nobody had wound yet. "You're supposed to clear left first," Ressa said, voice tight with something between irritation and grudging attention. "That's the standard breach order." "Standard order assumes the hostage is where the briefing says she is," Connor said. "She isn't." He went right instead, into the room the sim brief had marked empty, and found the simulated hostage exactly where a real captor would have hidden her, behind a support pillar nobody on the briefing slide had bothered to draw. He cleared the room. He neutralized the threat marker. He found her where the failed plan said she wouldn't be. Ressa didn't apologize. She just adjusted her angle without being told to, and that was its own kind of answer. Bravo 9 finished the simulation with the highest cohesion score logged that cycle, and nobody on the squad celebrated out loud, which told Connor more about how far they'd come than applause would have. Threll caught up to him in the corridor afterward, 4 arms still loose from the drill, mandible plates settled into something close to amusement. "Ressa called you reckless in the debrief," Threll said. "Then she requested you for the next sim by name." "That tracks," Connor said. "It does not track. It is a contradiction." Threll's tone stayed perfectly serious, which was somehow funnier than if he'd meant it as a joke. "Your species confuses me in new ways every week." That was the lighter beat, brief as it lasted. Commander Cal ended it fast, pulling Connor aside before he'd made it 20 steps further down the corridor, her voice low enough that it didn't carry to the cadets filing past. "You should know something," she said. "Word of the gate incident didn't stay inside this academy. It reached a Concord oversight panel that's already nervous about Earth's probationary status. One more hospitalized cadet, framed the wrong way in the wrong report, and it isn't just your file that gets flagged. It's every human who comes through that gate after you." Connor didn't answer right away. He thought of every cadet still in line behind him on a boarding ramp somewhere, someone who hadn't earned a single fight's worth of reputation yet, someone who'd walk through that scanner with nothing standing between them and the same laughter he'd gotten on day one, except they wouldn't have anything backing them up. No footage. No name anyone already respected. "Understood," he said. It wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement that the stakes had just changed shape. The petition started 2 days after that conversation, and Connor didn't know about it until Hennar handed him a data slate with 40 names on it, cadets from 5 different species asking the Academy to let him run a cross-discipline fighting elective. Threll's name was first. Ressa's was third. Even a pair of bonded Sendrai twins he'd never spoken to had signed, their names listed together the way their culture always paired them. "I'm not an instructor," Connor said. "You're the only person on this station who's beaten every species currently enrolled," Hennar said. "That makes you something. We just haven't named it yet." He said yes the way he did most things, without ceremony, without asking for anything in return. The first session held 6 cadets in a corner of gym module 4 nobody else wanted, Matt still smelling of the last unit's disinfectant. By the third session, the gym had to open its full floor, because word of a Terran teaching technique that worked across 4-armed honor forms, 6-limbed speed builds, and segmented exoskin alike had outrun every official announcement the Academy bothered to make. Threll adapted Connor's clinch logic into his 4-armed dueling forms inside a week, turning rigid honor postures into something that could actually improvise mid-fight. Ressa clipped 2 seconds off her strike recovery time by learning to load tension, the way Connor loaded a punch instead of a sprint. Even cadets who'd laughed at the boarding ramp started showing up at the back of the room, quiet, taking notes nobody made them take. "Pain doesn't get a vote," Connor told them, the same line he'd given Dorhan weeks earlier, except now 40 cadets across 5 species were repeating it back to him in their own accents. "Technique does. That's the whole class. Nobody clapped for that either. They just kept showing up, which was the only metric that mattered to him. The morning of the planetary alert drill started exactly like every other morning had for weeks. Connor in Gym Module 4 before sunrise station time, rewrapping his own knuckles out of habit more than need, the tape gone soft and familiar between his fingers. He drank from a water bottle he didn't finish. He checked the brace on his foot, found it holding, and set it aside without telling anyone he'd checked at all. That was the version of the morning nobody would remember later. The alert klaxon sounded at 700 station time, the kind of drill announcement every cadet had heard a dozen times before, except this one came with a live fire designation tag attached, the first of the cycle, meaning the combat drones on the Sundome floor would be running at full operational power instead of the dampened training setting. Squad Bravo 9 filed in with the rest of the intake, Unit Tash among them, joking with Ressa about which drone unit would draw the short straw of facing her first. Connor felt it before he understood why, a small wrongness in the way the drones powered up, a half-second stutter in their optic housings that shouldn't have been there on a fresh boot cycle. He didn't say anything. There wasn't time to, and nobody else seemed to notice it at all. The stutter Connor felt wasn't nothing. It found its outcome 4 seconds later, when the drone assigned to face Unitash locked its arm at full power instead of dampened training output, and brought it down across her raised guard instead of stopping at contact. Bone gave. The sound carried across the whole floor, sharp enough that 2 other drones paused mid-cycle like they'd heard it too. Connor was already moving before the echo died. He didn't check his ribs. He'd stopped checking them weeks ago, the same way he'd stopped expecting anyone to ask if he needed help before giving it. The drone's optic housing swung wide for a second strike, aimed higher this time, toward the back of Yuna's skull where her guard had dropped, and the gap between Connor and that swing was the only math that mattered. He closed it. No warning chime sounded as he crossed the floor. No safety lock caught the drone's arm before it committed. No version of this let him slow down and still get there in time. He took the strike on his own forearm instead of her skull, felt something old and half-healed in his ribs shift wrong under the impact, and didn't make a sound about it. Unitash, who kept a small paper tally folded inside her uniform sleeve, 1 mark for every drill her squad survived, certain nobody had ever noticed, stared up at him from the floor with her broken arm cradled against her chest, and her good hand still closed around a tally she hadn't finished marking. Connor put 3 elbows into the drone's optic housing before the sparks finished falling from the first strike. He took the hit, he held the line, he put it down. The Sundome went quiet the way it had the morning he first walked through the gate. This time, the quiet didn't belong to a crowd deciding whether to laugh. It belonged to 40 cadets and 6 instructors who had just watched a man with no augments and unhealed ribs choose, without a half-second of debate, to stand between a malfunctioning machine and someone he barely knew. Medical drones reached Una inside a minute. She kept her eyes on Connor the whole time they loaded her onto the gurney, and the last thing she said before they wheeled her out wasn't "thank you," it was, "mark it down. That's 1 more we survived." Somewhere behind the observation glass, a technician was already pulling diagnostic logs off the malfunctioning unit, and what those logs would say didn't change what had already happened on the floor. The academy suspended drills for a full day while engineers traced the fault. Dr. Asher found Connor before the suspension was even announced, took 1 look at the new bruising along his ribs, and didn't bother hiding how tired her voice sounded. "Your body is keeping score," she said, "whether you check the ledger or not. 1 day it's going to call the debt due regardless of what you decide to feel about it." "Copy that," Connor said, which was the same thing he always said when he had no intention of slowing down. Commander Cal's report on the incident went out to the oversight panel that evening. She didn't soften it, and didn't need to. The footage did the talking, and the footage showed a cadet absorbing a strike meant for someone else without a moment's calculation about the cost to himself. Whatever nervousness the Concord panel had been carrying about Earth's probationary status, It didn't survive contact with that recording any better than Vec Thurin's joints had survived contact with Connor's hands. Cal mentioned, almost in passing, that Brack Dawson had requested a transfer off the gate guard Carter that same week. Not in disgrace, just quietly. A Tholrec combat cast cadet, deciding there were postings less likely to put him near a Terran whose warnings turned out to mean exactly what they said. A handwritten note showed up taped to the gym door 2 mornings later, Yuna's careful printing under a drawing of a stick figure with its arm in a sling, giving a thumbs up anyway. Mark me down as one more, it read. Thanks for the math. Connor read it once, folded it, and didn't show anyone. That was the part of him that never changed, rewrapping his own knuckles before anyone had to ask, filing away the things that mattered without making a production of them. The cadet records office finally got around to closing out the flagged note on his intake file, the one that had questioned his species classification on the assumption that nobody could fight that well without augmentation. Someone struck through the line. Nobody replaced it with an apology. The correction itself was the only acknowledgement anyone offered, and it was enough. The gate scanner took the longest to catch up, the way institutions always did, but it changed eventually too. The red glyph that had once read Terran Cadet. Physical contact inadvisable dimmed to a softer amber, a new line stacked beneath the old warning instead of replacing it outright. Terran Cadet, cleared to instruct. Engage only if you can handle a lesson. It was the first time in the Concorde's threat tier history that a hazard classification had ever been amended to recommend voluntary engagement instead of caution from it. Connor walked back through that gate 3 weeks after the cycle had started with him limping through it alone. The fog still rolled off Halcyon Concorde's towers the same way it always had. The vending unit outside the gate still blinked its honest little error code, stealing nothing, promising nothing, exactly as broken as the day he'd arrived. The cadets near the rail didn't laugh this time. Threll fell into step on his left without a word, forearms loose and easy. Ressa fell in on his right a moment later, narrow frame relaxed in a way it hadn't been the first week they'd met. Behind them, cadets who'd once crossed the plaza to avoid standing near him now shifted sideways instead, clearing a path the way you do for someone you've decided is worth the room. Nobody announced it. Nobody needed to. Connor passed under the amber glyph without looking up at it, knuckles freshly taped, the corridor noise settling into something that didn't sound like mockery anymore. It sounded like cadets leaning in, waiting to hear what he'd say next. He didn't say anything yet. He just kept walking into a hallway that had finally learned to make room.